He was the most feared alpha in the realm, a ruthless king who hadn't smiled, let alone hoped, in 2 decades. To cross his path was a death sentence. But this ragged orphan girl didn't cower. Instead, she stepped right in front of him, held up a fragile dandelion, and whispered 3 words that paralyzed the cold-hearted ruler. Make a wish. He hadn't made one since he was a boy. Because for a man carrying a buried tragedy, hoping is the most dangerous thing you can do. And no one could have predicted what he did next. The horse came through the village gate like a thunderclap, foam flying from its mouth and fear rolling in its wide, white-rimmed eyes. Behind it, the man in the black cloak hauled on the reins with both arms, his jaws set hard, his boots gouging furrows into the packed dirt road. Children scattered, chickens erupted into the air in a storm of feathers and indignation. An old cart overturned with a splintering groan, sending apples rolling like red marbles into the ditches. And there, in the exact center of the road, stood a girl who did not move. She was small for her age, with shoulder-length brown hair that had been tied back in a hasty knot, and a faded blue dress that had been patched so many times the patches had patches. Her gray-blue eyes were fixed on the horse, not with terror, but with something closer to calculation. The animal was coming straight at her, its hooves pounding a drumbeat of disaster, and still she stood there, one hand half raised, as if she meant to calm it. The rider cursed under his breath and wrenched the reins hard to the left. The horse, already at the edge of its endurance, stumbled, recovered, and then stumbled again. Its foreleg buckled. The man threw himself clear with a practiced roll, landing on one knee in the dust, and for a moment the entire village of Ashwell held its breath. The horse went down, the dust settled, and the girl walked forward, past the kneeling man, straight to the fallen animal. Easy, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Easy now. Let me see your leg. The man rose to his feet, brushing dirt from his dark leather armor. His cloak, black as a raven's wing, had come loose at the shoulder and now dragged in the dust. His face was all sharp angles and hard lines, a deep scar cutting through his left eye, braille like a pale river through dark country. His gray-green eyes swept over the girl with a cold, assessing weight of a man who had learned long ago that the world was full of traps and that softness was the most dangerous one of all. Move aside, he said. His voice was low and flat, carrying the authority of a man who had never needed to raise it. I'll handle the horse. The girl did not move. He's thrown a shoe, she said, kneeling beside the animal's foreleg. Her fingers, small and calloused, ran lithe over the hoof. He's been favoring it for a while, I think. The road's been bad this spring, all those stones washed loose. You came down the north track, didn't you? That's the worst one. My foster mother, I mean. She always says the north track is the devil's own staircase. The man stared at her. In 20 years of ruling a kingdom, no child had ever spoken to him like this, as if he were a neighbor who had stopped by to borrow a cup of salt. His horse, a great black stallion named Storm, had been with him through battles and blizzards, and now this thin little girl in a patched dress was running her fingers through his mane as if he were a farm pony. The shoe, the man repeated. Can you fix it? The girl looked up at him then, and something in her expression shifted. It was not fear, it was not awe, it was simply an appraisal, the way one might look at a piece of furniture that had been placed in an inconvenient spot. I can, she said, but I'll need to take him to our shed, and I'll need my tools, and you'll need to wait. She paused, her head tilting slightly. Can you wait? The question hung in the air. It was such a small, ordinary word, wait. And yet for Alexander, king of the Thornwood, it was a word he had not heard directed at him in a decade. Think. People did not ask him to wait. They begged him to hurry, or they begged him to stay, or they fell silent altogether when he entered a room. I can wait, he said slowly, as if testing the words, for now. The girl nodded, apparently satisfied, and turned back to the horse. She murmured something to the animal, something too low for him to hear, and Storm's wild-eyed panic seemed to ease, just slightly. The man watched her hands move in their quiet, practiced rhythm, and he felt something shift in his chest, something old and unfamiliar, like a door he had forgotten was there, creaking open a crack. Behind him, the village was stirring back to life. Women were gathering up the scattered apples. Children crept out from behind barrels and fences. A heavy-set woman with a flour-dusted apron came hurrying down the road, her face creased with worry. "Nora!" she called. Nora, what have you done now? The girl Nora did not look up. Nothing, Marin, I've done nothing. There's a horse with a thrown shoe and a gentleman who needs to wait. The woman called Marin reached them, her eyes widening as she took in the tall stranger in the black cloak. She dropped into a hasty curtsy, her hands twisting in her apron. Your Grace, she said, her voice trembling. We weren't told. We had no word that you were coming to Ashwell. If we'd known, we'd have prepared. Nobody knew, the man said flatly. I came to see the borderlands. The horse gave out. He gestured at Nora, who was still crouched by the stallion's hooves. She says she can fix the shoe. Marin's face went through several expressions in quick succession, horror, disbelief, and then a kind of weary resignation. She does have a way with animals, she admitted. More than I can say for her way with people. Nora, you'll be careful. This is the king. The king, Nora. You'll mind your manners. Nora finally looked up, and for the first time, something like surprise flickered across her face. She studied the man with a new attention, taking in the dark armor, the scarred eyebrow, the black cloak now draped over one arm. You're the king, she said. It was not a question. I am. Oh, she considered this for a moment. Well, your horse still needs a new shoe, and you still need to wait. The king can wait, can't he? Marin made a strangled sound. The man's mouth twitched at the corner. Not quite a smile, but something close to it. It was the first time in a long while that anyone had spoken to him without the weight of ceremony, without the careful distance of subjects addressing their sovereign. This girl had looked at him and seen not a crown, but a man with a lame horse and a long road. I suppose, he said. The king can wait. The shed behind Marin's cottage was small and smelled of hay, old leather, and dried herbs hanging from the rafters. Nora worked in silence, her small hands moving with a confidence that belied her age. She filed the hoof, fitted the shoe, hammered it in place with a series of clean, ringing blows. The king watched from the doorway, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. You've done this before, he said. Plenty of times. She did not look up. Marin says I have a gift for it. I say it's just patience. The horses don't mind me, and I don't mind them. It's people I have trouble with. People trouble you? She paused, the hammer resting on her knee. People leave, she said simply. Horses don't. When you fix a horse's shoe, it stays fixed. When you do a kindness for a person, they go away, and you don't know if it mattered at all. The king said nothing. He had to think his life surrounded by people who came and went, advisors and courtiers and petitioners, all of them passing through his halls like water through a sieve. He had learned not to expect them to stay. He had learned not to want them to. You're done, Nora said, standing and brushing off her skirt. He'll be fine now. Just keep him off the north track for a few days. She turned to face him then, and he saw that she was holding something in her hand. A small yellow flower, its stem broken and its petals still bright. She must have picked it from the roadside while she worked, unnoticed. Here, she said, and she held it out to him. The king looked at the flower, then at the girl, then back at the flower. It's a dandelion, he said. I know. She pushed it closer. Make a wish. The words hit him like a blow to the chest. A wish. He had not made a wish since he was a boy. Crouched in the courtyard of his father's castle, blowing the seeds of a dandelion into the wind and praying for a different life. He had wished for his father to come home from the war. His father had not come home. He had wished for his wife to live through the fever. She had not lived. He had wished for his son to draw one more breath. The boy had not drawn it. Wishes were for the foolish and the young. Wishes were for children who had not yet learned the cruel arithmetic of loss. But the girl was looking at him with those steady gray-blue eyes, and the dandelion was trembling slightly in her hand, and he found that he could not say no to her. Make a wish, she repeated, softer this time. It doesn't have to come true. That's not the point. The point is that you made it. He reached out and took the flower. Its stem was warm from her hand. He held it for a long moment, feeling the weight of it. So, think random, so fragile, so utterly without value, and yet, He raised it to his lips and blew. The seeds scattered into the wind, 100 tiny parachutes drifting toward the sky. He did not say what he wished for. He was not sure he knew how to say it at all. Nora smiled, a small, quiet smile that lit her whole face. "There," she said. "That wasn't so hard, was it?" The king looked down at the empty stem in his hand, and then at the girl who had given it to him. The crack in the door of his chest widened, just a little. "No," he said, "I suppose it wasn't." The old house at the edge of Ashwell had stood empty for so long that the smell of dust and dry straw had settled into its bones. The king did not seem to mind. He had slept in worse places, tents on frozen ground, the backs of wagons during long marches, the stone floors of keeps under siege. A roof was a roof. He woke before dawn, as he always did. The window faced east, and the first pale light crept across the floorboards like a cautious animal. He lay still for a moment, listening. The village was waking too, the low murmur of voices, the clank of a bucket, a dog barking somewhere beyond the hedgerow. Ordinary sounds. He had not heard ordinary sounds in a long time. There was a knock at the door. Not the sharp, formal knock of his steward. This was lighter, hesitant, as if the knuckles had paused twice before committing. "Enter," he said. The door creaked open, and the girl from yesterday stood there, holding a wooden tray. She wore the same faded blue dress, and her brown hair was tied back with a piece of twine. In the gray morning light, she looked even smaller than he remembered. "They said you needed to stay," she said, "so I brought you tea. For the swelling in your leg. Marin, my mother, she makes it for the soul thing where they pass through. It's not fancy, but it works." He looked at the tray. There was a clay cup, steam curling from its surface, and beside it a small crust of bread with a smear of honey. Not a servant's offering, a neighbor's. "You may set it on the table," he said. She did, then stood there with her hands clasped in front of her, as if she were waiting for something. He did not know what. He was not used to being waited on by children. "That will be all," he said. She nodded and turned toward the door, but at the threshold she stopped, her hand on the latch, and looked back at him. "You should drink it while it's warm," she said. "It tastes terrible cold." Then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her. The king stood in the middle of the room, alone with the steam rising from the cup. He did not sit down. He walked to the table, picked up the cup, and took a sip. It was bitter, herbal, with a sharp edge that made him wince. He took another sip anyway. The bread was still warm, the honey had soaked into the crust, and when he bit into it, he remembered, suddenly sharply, his mother's kitchen. The way she used to drizzle honey over bread for him before the tutors came. He had not thought of that in years. He finished the broth and drank the rest of the tea, even though it was bitter, and then he stood at the window and watched the village wake up. His steward, a thin-faced nobleman named Sir Aldrich, arrived mid-morning with reports from the border. The king listened with half his attention, his eyes fixed on the road beyond the window. He did not know what he was looking for. "The horse will need at least 3 more days," Sir Aldrich said. "The farrier in the next village is old and slow, and the beast favors its right foreleg badly." 3 days? The "thank" repeated. "Unless you would prefer to take a fresh mount from the local lord. There is a small manor 2 hours north." The king considered this. He could leave today. He could ride away from this dusty village and the girl with the gray-blue eyes, and the crack in the door of his chest could close itself over again the way it always did. "No," he said, "I will wait for the horse." Sir Aldrich raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He was learning not to question the king's decisions. That afternoon, the king walked to the edge of the village to inspect the damage to his horse's leg. The animal was stabled in a small lean-to behind the healer's cottage, and when he arrived, he found Nora already there, kneeling in the straw with a brush in her hand. She looked up when she saw him, and for a moment there was something like alarm in her face. Then it passed, and she went back to brushing the horse's mane. "He likes this," she said, not looking at him. "The brushing, I mean, he's got a nervous temper. But he settles when you brush him. Marin says it's because he was a war horse, and war horses never quite forget the noise." The king came closer and stood at the edge of the stall. The horse, a big bay stallion named Cormorant, turned his head and nickered softly at the king, then returned his attention to the girl and the brush. "You know horses," the king said. "Some," she said, "not like the stable masters in the city, but enough. I like them better than people, if I'm honest. People talk too much. Horses just tell you what they need, and then they're quiet." The king said nothing. He watched her hands move in slow, even strokes along the horse's neck, and he noticed the small scar on her left hand, a pale mark against her skin. "How did you get that?" he asked. She looked down at her hand as if she had forgotten it was there. "Hot pot," she said. "When I was little, I reached for something I shouldn't have, and Marin said—" She stopped, and a small smile crossed her face. "She said I've been reaching for things I shouldn't have ever since." The king felt something stir in his chest, something he could not name. He cleared his throat. "The tea," he said. "It was good. The bread, too." Nora looked up at him, surprised. "You drank it all?" "I did. I told Marin you would. She said you'd probably dunk it out the window. She said kings don't like village tea." The king almost smiled. "Almost. Your mother underestimates the appetites of kings," he said. "We like bread and honey, and tea that is not too terrible." Nora laughed, a small, surprised sound, as if she had not expected to find anything funny in him. She ducked her head, hiding the smile, and went back to brushing the horse. The king stood there a moment longer, watching her. The afternoon light came through the cracks in the lean-to roof, falling in pale stripes across the straw. He noticed the way she talked to the horse, low and steady, as if they were old friends. He noticed the way her hands moved, patient and sure. He noticed the small wooden plate on the ground beside her covered in charcoal drawings. A bird, a leaf, a bowl of apples. "You draw," he said. She stiffened, then shrugged. "It's nothing, just scribbles. Marin says I'd be better off mending the fence. May I see?" She hesitated, then she picked up the wooden plate and held it out to him, not quite meeting his eyes. He took it and looked at the drawings. They were rough, unpolished, but there was something alive in them. The bird's head tilted at a curious angle, the leaf with its veins carefully marked, the bowl of a post with the paddle with one apple slightly lopsided. "These are good," he said. She looked at him, searching his face for the lie. He did not look away. "You're not just saying that?" she asked. "I do not say things I do not mean," he said. "It is one of the few privileges of being king." She smiled then, a real smile, and took the plate back, holding it against her chest like a treasure. "Thank you," she said. "No one's ever—" She stopped, and her cheeks flushed. "Well, thank you." The king looked at her for a long moment. The scar on his left eyebrow seemed to ache, the way it sometimes did when he was tired. He had not thought about that scar in years. It had come from the same battle that had taken his father, and he had carried it like a memory he could not wash away. But looking at this girl, with her charcoal birds and her nervous smile, he found that the memory did not hurt as much as it usually did. It was still there. It was just quieter. He turned to go. At the door of the lean-to, he paused. "The tea," he said without turning around. "I would not mind another cup tomorrow." Behind him, Nora's voice was small but clear. "I'll bring it." The king walked back toward the old house, and the afternoon sun fell warm on his shoulders, and for the first time in a very long time, he found himself looking forward to the morning. He did not know what it meant. He was not sure he wanted to know, but he knew he would be there, waiting by the window, when the girl with the gray-blue eyes came knocking again. The morning came in soft gray light, the kind that made the village of Ashwell look older than it was. The thatched roof sagged a little lower, the wooden fences leaned a little more, and the air smelled of damp earth and wood smoke. Nora was up before the rooster, as she always not. She fed the chickens, hauled water from the well, and set the kettle over the fire, before Marin even opened her eyes. "You are up early," Marin said, her voice thick with sleep. She sat up on her cot, squinting at the girl. "The king is not going to drink his tea any faster because you arrive at dawn." Nora did not answer. She was already wrapping the herbs in a clean cloth, her fingers moving with practiced ease. Marin watched her for a moment, then sighed. "Nora, be careful with him." "I'm always careful," Nora said. "You know what I mean," Marin said. "He is not like the village men. He is a king. He could have your head for a wrong word." Nora paused, her hand hovering over the bundle of herbs. "He would not do that." Marin raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and how do you know?" Nora thought about it. She thought about the way the king had looked at her drawings yesterday, the way he had said, "This one is good," without hesitation, the way his voice had softened just a little when he asked about her scar. She did not know how to explain any of that to Marin, so she just said, "I know."
Maren shook her head and pulled the blanket up to her chin. Go on then, before the tea goes cold. The walk to the old house was short. Nora had made it twice already, and the path was already familiar. She passed the blacksmith's shed, where old Tom was already hammering at something, the sound ringing out in the quiet morning. She passed the baker's stall, where a thin wisp of smoke rose from the chimney. She passed the well, where two women were drawing water, their voices low and gossipy. They stopped talking when she walked by, and Nora felt their eyes on her back. She was used to it. She had been used to it her whole life. The old house sat at the edge of the village, half hidden behind a row of elderberry bushes. It had been empty for years before the king arrived, used only for storage and the occasional traveler who needed a roof for a night. Now guards stood outside, and horses were tied to the fence, and the whole place had the air of something important. Nora stopped at the gate. She could see the guards, two of them, standing by the door. They recognized her now. One of them nodded, the other just watched her with flat, uninterested eyes. Nora walked past them to the side of the house where she had learned the kitchen door was. She was about to knock when she heard something. A soft, rhythmic sound, like metal hitting stone. She paused, listening. It came from the small stable behind the house, the one they had converted for the king's horse. Nora set the tea down on the kitchen step and walked around to the stable. The door was open. Inside, she could see the big, dark horse, Cormorant, standing quietly in his stall. The king was not there, but the sound was. It was coming from the horse's front leg. Nora stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. There, on the right front hoof, the shoe was loose. She could see it clearly now, the metal edge lifted just a fraction, catching the light. Every time Cormorant shifted his weight, the shoe made that small, rhythmic sound against the stone floor. Nora knew about horseshoes. Old Tom had shown her once, when she was small, how to check if a shoe was fitted properly. If it lifts even a hair, he had said, it will come off on the road. And a horse with a loose shoe is a horse that will stumble. She looked around. There was a small set of tools in the corner of the stable, left by the village farrier who had come to check on the horse the day before. A hammer, a rasp, some nails. Nora walked over and picked up the hammer. She weighed it in her hand. She should not be doing this, she knew that. The farrier would be back, someone would fix the shoe. It was not her job, it was not her place. But the horse was standing there, patient and trusting. And the shoe was loose, and she knew how to fix it. Nora knelt down beside Cormorant. She made a soft clicking sound with her tongue, the way she did with the village horses, and the big animal turned his head to look at her. His eyes were dark and calm. He did not seem afraid. "All right," she whispered. "Let me see." She worked slowly, carefully. She had watched old Tom enough times to know the rhythm of it. She lifted the shoe gently, cleaned out the dirt and small stones that had gotten underneath, then set it back down and tapped in a new nail. Her hands were small, but steady. Cormorant stood still, as if he understood that she was trying to help. It took her a long time, longer than it would have taken old Tom, but she did not rush. She checked the shoe twice, making sure it was solid, making sure there was no give. When she was done, she sat back on her heels and looked at her work. It was not perfect, but it was solid. The shoe would hold. She was putting the tools back when she heard footsteps behind her. She froze, her heart jumping into her throat. She turned slowly, expecting to see a guard, or worse, Sir Aldrich with his thin, disapproving face. It was the king. He stood in the doorway of the stable, his dark cloak draped over his shoulders, his gray-green eyes fixed on her. He did not look angry. He looked, if anything, puzzled. "What are you doing?" he asked. Nora's mouth went dry. She had not thought about what she would say if she was caught. She had not thought about it at all. "The shoe was loose," she said. "Her feet came out smaller than she wanted it to." "On your horse?" It was going to come off. The king walked closer. He did not hurry. He stopped a few feet away from her and looked down at Cormorant's front leg. Then he looked at Nora. "You fixed it," he said. Nora nodded. She was still holding the hammer. She realized this and set it down quickly, as if it had burned her. "I know it is not my place," she said. "I am sorry. The shoe was going to come off, and he would have stumbled. And I know how to do it. Old Tom showed me once." "And old Tom," the king repeated. "The farrier. He showed me how to check a shoe. A long time ago. I have never done it myself, but I watched him, and it looked like it needed doing, so I did it." The king was quiet for a long moment. He crouched down, running his hand along Cormorant's leg, checking the shoe himself. Nora held her breath. She watched his fingers move over the metal, testing it, feeling for any give. He stood up. He looked at her for a long moment, and Nora could not read his face. "Your hands are dirty," he said. Nora looked down at her hands. They were smudged with dirt and metal dust. Her fingers stained dark. She had not noticed. "I will wash them," she said. The king reached into his pocket and pulled out a cloth. It was a good cloth, fine and white, not the kind of thing anyone in Ashwell would use to wipe their hands. He held it out to her. "Take it," he said. Nora stared at the cloth. She did not move. "It will come off with soap and water," she said. "I do not need—" "Take it," the king said again. His voice was not sharp, but it was firm. "You did good work. You should not have to walk back with dirt on your hands." Nora reached out and took the cloth. It was soft, softer than anything she had ever touched.
Thing too. In Fortgith wiped her hands with it, feeling the dirt come away, leaving the fine white fabric stained with gray streaks. "I will wash this and bring it back," she said. "Keep it," the king said. He turned and walked out of the stable, his cloak brushing against the doorframe. He stopped at the door and looked back at her. "Your work is good," he said. "The farrier could not have done it better." Nora stood there holding the stained cloth, watching him walk away. She had expected him to be angry. She had expected him to tell her to stay away from his horse, to mind her own business. He had given her his cloth. He had told her she did good work. She looked down at her hands. The dirt was gone now, but her fingers still smelled of metal and horses. She folded the cloth carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket. She walked back to the kitchen door and picked up the tea. It was cold now, but she did not care. She left the bundle of herbs by the door, a small offering, and walked back toward the village. She did not see the king standing at the window of the old house, watching her go. She did not see the way his hand rested on the windowsill, the fingers loose, the tension in his shoulders softer than it had been in years. Sir Aldrich stood in the doorway of the room, his thin face unreadable. "The girl fixed the horse's shoe," he said. "I saw," the king said. "She has no business touching your horse," Sir Aldrich said. "She is a village girl. She could have hurt him." "She did not hurt him," the king said. "She fixed him." Sir Aldrich was quiet for a moment. "You are letting her get too close," he said. The king did not answer. He watched Nora's small figure disappear around the bend in the road, and he said nothing at all. The harvest festival had come to Ashwell, and with it, a hot kind of brightness that the village rarely wore. Garlands of wheat and early wildflowers hung from the eaves of cottages. The smell of roasting mutton and fresh bread drifted down the single dirt lane, and even the oldest men, the ones who usually sat silent on their porches, had dragged their stools into the sun. Nora had been looking forward to this day for weeks. She had helped Marin hang the last of the dried herbs in the workshop that morning, her hands quick and careful, her mind already wandering toward the festival. She had even saved a small coin earned from mending old Tom's spare apron last month to buy a ribbon, a blue one if the peddler had any. She had imagined tying it around her wrist, the way some of the other girls did. She had imagined a great deal, it turned out. The festival square was crowded with families. Children ran between the legs of adults, laughing, chasing each other with sticks topped with paper flowers. The baker's daughter, a girl named Rose with curly red hair, was showing off a new yellow dress. The miller's sons were tossing a leather ball. Everyone seemed to know exactly where to stand, who to talk to, what to do. Nora stood at the edge of the square with her small coin in her pocket, watching. She spotted the peddler's cart near the church steps, and her heart gave a little hop. She started toward it, weaving between the clusters of villagers, keeping her head down the way she always did. She was almost there when a group of children, older than her, stepped into her path. It was Rose and two of her friends. They had been giggling about something, but they stopped when they saw her. "Look," Rose said, not quietly. "It's the orphan girl. Did you come to buy something?" Orphan girl. Nora's hand closed around the coin in her pocket. I was just looking," she said quietly. "Looking at what?" Rose's eyes swept over Nora's faded blue dress, the patched hem, the two short sleeves. "The peddler has ribbons, but ribbons cost money. Do you have money, orphan girl?" "I have a coin," Nora said, and she felt the words come out smaller than she wanted them to. Rose laughed. 1 coin. That won't buy a ribbon. That might buy a piece of bread, if the baker is feeling generous. And you look like you need bread more than ribbons. The other girls laughed too. A few adults nearby glanced over, but no one said anything. No one ever said anything. Nora felt her face grow hot. She wanted to say something sharp, something clever, but the words were stuck somewhere in her throat, tangled up with the familiar feeling of being too small, too invisible, too much. I wasn't going to buy anything, she said finally, and she turned and walked away before her voice could break. She did not go back to the square. She did not go home either, because she knew Marin would see her face and start asking questions, and she did not think she could answer them without crying. So she walked past the last of the cottages, down the narrow path that led to the river, and she sat down on the flat stone where she sometimes came to think. The river was low this time of year, and it made a soft, steady sound as it moved over the stones. A few dragonflies hovered above the reeds. The noise of the festival was distant here, muffled by the bend in the river, like a memory of a sound. Nora pulled her knees up to her chest and wrapped her arms around them. She told herself it didn't matter. She had known, hadn't she? She had known that the other children would not suddenly decide to be kind. She had known that she was not one of them, that she would never be one of them. That the village would always see her as the girl who appeared one winter with no mother, no father, no name but the one the priest had given her. She had known all of that, and yet the coin in her pocket felt heavier than it should have. She pulled it out and looked at it, a small copper piece worn smooth on one side. She had worked for it, she had earned it, and she had wanted so badly to buy that ribbon. She was still sitting there staring at the water when she heard the sound of footsteps on the path behind her. She turned, expecting to see Marin or maybe one of the village boys who sometimes came to fish. But it was not Marin. It was not a boy. It was Sir Aldrich, the king's man with the thin face and the cautious eyes. He was wearing his usual dark tunic, and he was carrying something wrapped in a piece of cloth. He stopped a few paces from her, and for a moment he just looked at her, as if he were trying to decide something. "Girl," he said. Nora stood up quickly. She had learned in the past few days to be careful around this man. He watched her the way a hawk watched a field mouse. "Sir," she said, and she dipped her head. Sir Aldrich walked to the edge of the river and stopped. He did not sit. He did not come closer. He simply stood there, looking at the water, and then he spoke. "The king noticed you leave the festival." Nora blinked. "He did?" "He did." Sir Aldrich's voice was flat. "He noticed you were sitting alone by the river. He said you looked like you needed something to eat." Nora did not know what to say to that. She stared at the cloth in Sir Aldrich's hands. Sir Aldrich held it out to her. "Take it," he said. "It is a honey cake. From the festival. The king asked me to bring it to you." Nora's hand moved before her think could catch up. She took the cloth, and it was warm, and when she unfolded it, there it was. A golden honey cake, glistening with syrup, with a small cluster of chopped nuts pressed into the top. It was the most beautiful thing she had seen all day. "Did he—" She stopped. Her voice felt strange. "Did he say anything else?" Sir Aldrich looked at her for a long moment. His face was hard to read, but there was something in his eyes that was not quite disapproval, something closer to confusion. "He said," Sir Aldrich said slowly, "that you worked hard, and that you deserved a sweet." Nora felt something crack open in her chest. It was not a big thing, not like a shout or a sob. It was small and quiet, like a seed breaking open underground in the dark. "Thank you," she whispered. Please tell him thank you." Sir Aldrich nodded once. He turned to go, but then he stopped. He looked back at her, his thin face unreadable in the fading light. "Girl," he said, "the king is a man who has lost much. He does not give things lightly. Do you understand what I am telling you?" Nora held the honey cake close to her chest. It was still warm. She could smell the honey and the nuts and the sweetness of it, and it was the smell of something she had never had before. "I understand," she said quietly. Sir Aldrich looked at her for another moment, and then he turned and walked back up the path toward the village. Nora sat back down on the flat stone. She did not eat the honey cake right away. She held it in her hands and looked at it, at the careful way it had been made, at the nuts pressed into the top, at the golden glaze that caught the last of the afternoon sun. She thought about the king, about the way he had looked at her when she had handed him the dandelion. She thought about the white cloth he had given her, folded neat in her pocket. She thought about the fact that he had noticed her leave, that he had noticed her at all. She took a small bite of the honey cake. It was the sweetest thing she had ever tasted. She sat by the river and ate the honey cake slowly, a little at a time, making it last. The dragonflies danced over the reeds, the river made its soft, steady sound, and somewhere back in the village, she knew, a man who had not made a wish in 20 years was standing at the window of the old house, looking out toward the river, toward her. She did not know if he was smiling, she thought. Maybe he was. That night, when she went home, Maren was waiting by the door. Her arms were crossed, and her face was a careful mask of disapproval that Nora knew very well. "You missed the festival," Maren said. "I looked for you everywhere." Nora pulled the white cloth from her pocket and held it out. "I had a honey cake," she said. "The king sent it to me." Maren's face went still. She took the cloth, unfolded it, looked at the few crumbs that remained. When she looked up, her eyes were sharp and worried. "Nora," she said slowly, "the king sent you a honey cake." "Yes." "By Sir Aldrich?" "Yes." Maren was quiet for a long moment. Then she handed the cloth back to Nora and said in a voice that was trying very hard to be steady, "Nora, I need you to be careful." "I know, Maren." "I don't think you do." Maren's hand came up and rested on Nora's shoulder, warm and rough from years of grinding herbs and tending gardens. "He is not a man like the men of this village. He is a king. He has power that we cannot even imagine. And power like that, it can be kind, but it can also be a great deal more than we can handle." Nora looked down at the cloth in her hands. It was soft, finer than anything she had ever owned. She thought about the way the king had looked at her when she had handed him the dandelion. She thought about the way he had said, "I have not made a wish in a long time." "He was sad," she said quietly. "He was so sad, Maren. I wanted him to have something to wish for." Maren's hand tightened on her shoulder. "Oh, child," she said, and her voice was softer now. "You cannot fix a king's sadness. That is not your burden to carry." "I know," Nora said. But she did not know, not really. She went to bed that night with the white cloth folded under her pillow, and she dreamed of a field of dandelions, and a man standing in the middle of it, and the sound of his voice saying, "I have not made a wish in a long time." In the old house at the edge of the village, the king stood at the window for a long time that night. He had not meant to notice the girl at the festival. He had not meant to notice her at all. But he had seen her standing at the edge of the square, alone, and he had seen the moment the other children had turned her away. He had seen her walk down to the river with her head down, and he had found himself asking Sir Aldrich, in a voice he did not recognize as his own, to take her a piece of the honey cake he had been given by the village elders. He did not know why he had done it. He did not know why the image of her sitting alone by the river would not leave him. He only knew to do that when he had seen her take the cake, when he had seen her hold it like it was something precious. Something in his chest had loosened, just a little. He stood at the window, looking out at the river, and for the first time in a very long time, he made a wish. He did not say it out loud. He did not know if wishes came true, but he made one anyway. The morning after the harvest festival came in soft and quiet, the way mornings do when the world is still catching its breath. Nora stepped out of the cottage before the sun had fully cleared the tree line, her basket hooked over one arm. The dew soaked the hem of her faded blue dress, and she did not mind. She had slept badly, but not badly enough to stay in bed. Maren had said nothing more about the king after last night's warning. She had simply looked at Nora across the table, her mouth pressed into the thin line, and then gone back to sorting dried lavender. That was Maren's way. She said her piece once, and then she let it sit in the air like smoke, waiting for you to walk into it. Nora walked into it all morning. She gathered chamomile by the stream. She pulled weeds from the herb bed behind the cottage. She fed the chickens, who clucked at her as if they too had opinions about kings and orphan girls. And all the while the words circled in her head like birds looking for a place to land. He is not someone you can just walk up to. But he had been kind, twice. The white handkerchief, with the embroidered corner, folded so neatly it might have been a gift from a mother. And then the honey cake, wrapped in cloth, carried by Sir Aldrich with those strange, careful words. He lost a great deal. He does not give things lightly. Nora did not know what the king had lost. She only knew that when she looked at him, she saw someone who had forgotten how to be looked at. Someone who had built a wall so high that even the birds could not fly over it. And she wondered,
The way she wondered about the birds she named and the wildflowers she pressed between pages, whether anyone had ever tried to hand him something small and silly and hopeful. The dandelion nanoseconds grew along the edge of the old road, just past the turn where the village gave way to open fields. Nora had walked past them 100 times without thinking, but this morning she stopped. She knelt in the damp grass and looked at the bright yellow heads nodding in the breeze, and she thought about wishes. She had made wishes before, small ones, the kind orphans learn to make quietly, so that no one hears and no one laughs. She had wished for a warm coat that fit her. She had wished for Marin to live a long, long time. She had wished once. For a mother she could not remember, and then she had stopped wishing for that because it made her chest ache in a way she could not fix. The king had said, last night, that he had not made a wish in a long time. But he had been standing at the window when he said it, and Nora had been too far away to see his face. She had only heard his voice, low and rough, like a door that had not been opened in years. She picked one dandelion, then she picked another. Then she put the first one back and kept the second, because it was fuller, rounder, more ready to be blown into the wind. The old house where the king was staying sat at the far end of the village, past the smithy and the mill, where the lane narrowed and the trees closed in. Nora had walked this path twice before carrying tea, and both times her heart had hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. This time was no different. She told herself she was only going to check on the herb garden behind the house, which was true enough. She had planted mint and feverfew there, and someone needed to water them. The dandelion was in her hand. She had wrapped the stem in a bit of grass so it would not wilt, and she held it carefully, as if it were something precious. She told herself she would leave it on the doorstep. She told herself she would not knock. She told herself a dozen small lies, and then she turned the corner and saw him. The king was standing in the yard behind the old house, his back to her, one hand resting on the neck of his great black stallion. The horse had thrown a shoe 2 days ago, and Nora had fixed it herself, and she had never told anyone how proud that had made her feel. The king was speaking to the horse in a low voice, too soft for Nora to hear the words, and his shoulders were not as straight as they usually were. She stopped. The dandelion felt very small in her hand. She could turn around, she could go back to the cottage, and press the dandelion between the pages of Marin's old Erd book, and no one would ever know. The king would not know, the world would not know, and nothing would change. But something had already changed. She had seen him standing there, speaking to a horse, as if the horse were the only creature in the world who would listen. And she thought, with a sudden, aching clarity, that he was the loneliest person she had ever met. She walked forward, her boots made soft sounds in the grass, and the king turned before she reached him. His face was unreadable, the way it always was, but there was a flicker at the corner of his eyes, something that might have been surprise or might have been the morning light. "Nora," he said. Not a question, a statement, as if he had been expecting her, or as if he had decided to expect her. She stopped a few paces away. The dandelion was still in her hand, and she was suddenly acutely aware of how strange this must look. An orphan girl, standing in the king's yard, holding a weed. "I brought you something," she said. The king looked at the dandelion. Then he looked at Iko. His eyes were gray-green, the color of the river after rain, and they held no mockery, only a kind of tired watchfulness, the way a man looks at something he has learned not to trust. "It's a dandelion," he said. "Yes," Nora said. "I know." She held it out. The stem was wrapped in grass, and the yellow head was bright and unapologetic, and she did not know why she was doing this, only that she could not stop now. "You're supposed to make a wish," she said. "You blow the seeds into the wind, and you make a wish." The king was silent for a long moment. The horse shifted its weight, and somewhere in the village a dog barked, and the morning went on as if nothing important were happening. "I have not made a wish in a long time," he said at last. His voice was quiet, and he said it the way a man might say, "I have not been home in a long time," or "I have not slept well in a long time." It was not a confession, it was simply a fact, laid out on the grass between them. Nora nodded. She did not say, "I know." She did not say that she had heard him last night standing at the window. She simply stood there, holding the dandelion out, waiting. The king looked at her. Really looked at her. The way he had not looked at her before. He looked at her gray-blue eyes and her brown hair and her faded blue dress. And he looked at the small burn scar on her left arm, and he looked at the dandelion in her hand. "Why?" he asked. Nora thought about it. She thought about the white handkerchief and the honey cake. She thought about the way he had spoken to his horse, soft and low, as if the horse were the only one who would not judge him. She thought about Marin's warning, and she thought about the bird she had named Wren, the one with the broken wing that she had fed until it could fly again. "Because everyone should have something to wish for," she said, "even kings." The silence stretched. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that holds its breath, the kind that waits to see what will happen next. Then the king reached out and took the dandelion from her hand. His fingers brushed hers, rough and calloused, and he held the dandelion as if he were holding something fragile. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he raised it to his lips, and he blew. The seeds scattered into the morning air, dozens of tiny white parachutes, catching the light and drifting over the yard, over the horse, over the old house with its sagging roof. They rose and fell and rose again, and Nora watched them go, and she felt something loosen in her chest, something she had not known was tight. The king lowered his hand. The dandelion stem was bare now, and he looked at it, and then he looked at her. "I made a wish," he said. Nora did not ask what it was. She wanted to, but she did not. Some wishes are meant to be kept, and she understood the way birds knew when to fly south. "Good," she said. "That's good." She turned to go. She had taken 3 steps when his voice stopped her. "Nora." She looked back. The king was still holding the bare stem, and his face was harder to read than ever, but there was something in his voice that had not been there before, something almost soft. "Thank you," he said. Nora smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that does not take over your whole face, but it was real. "You're welcome," she said. "Your Majesty." She walked back toward the cottage, and she did not look back. She did not see the king stand there for a long time, looking at the bare stem in his hand. She did not see him tuck it carefully into the pocket of his tunic next to his heart. She did not see the way his jaw tightened, or the way he blinked once, twice, as if the morning light had gotten into his eyes. But she felt it. She felt it the way you feel the turn of the season, the way you know, before anyone tells you, that the world has shifted just a little. When she reached the cottage, Marin was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, a knowing look on her face. "You went to see him," Marin said. Nora did not try to lie. "Yes," Marin sighed. She looked at Nora for a long moment, and then she shook her head, and her voice was softer than Nora had expected. "Did he say anything?" "He said thank you." Marin was quiet. Then she stepped aside and held the door open and said, "Come inside. There's bread." Nora went inside. She sat at the table and ate the bread, and she did not tell Marin about the dandelion, or the wish, or the way the king's fingers had brushed hers. She kept it, the way you keep a seed, and she waited to see what would grow. That night, before she slept, she took the white handkerchief from under her pillow and folded it carefully, the way the king had folded it when he gave it to her. She placed it on the small table beside her bed, and she looked at it in the dim light. And she thought about the seeds drifting over the old house. She did not know what the king had wished for, but she hoped, with the fierce, quiet hope of an orphan girl who had learned to wish without making a sound, that it had come true. The morning after the dandelion, Nora woke before the sun had fully climbed over the thatched roofs of Ashwell. She lay still for a moment, her fingers brushing the folded white cloth on the little table beside her bed, and she let herself remember the way the king had held the flingpluff and the dandelion, the way he had tucked it into his pocket close to his heart. She smiled into the gray light, then pushed herself up and pulled on her faded blue dress, her mind already busy with the day ahead. She had decided, without quite admitting it to herself, that she would go to the old house again. Not to ask for anything, not even to speak, really, just to be near him. To see if perhaps he might look at her the way he had looked at the dandelion seeds as they scattered on the wind. It was a foolish hope, she knew, but it warmed her chest like a coal kept carefully alive under ash. The path to the old house led her past the village well, where a cluster of women had gathered with their buckets, their voices low and quick. Nora kept her head down, the way she had learned to do, but she caught the tail of a sentence that made her steps slow.
The king's man, the tall one, with the gray in his beard. I heard him asking about the orphan girl. Nora's heart gave a hard, sudden knock against her ribs. She did not stop. She kept walking, her bare feet steady on the packed earth, but her ears stayed open, hungry and afraid at once. Asked what she does when she visits the old house, another voice said, and there was a note in it that Nora knew well, the note of people discussing something they did not understand and therefore suspected. Said the king has been too lenient with her. Said a girl like that ought not to be filling the king's ears with her chatter. A third voice, lower, almost kind. She's just a child. She brings him tea, that's all. Children can be craftier than grown men when they want something. Nora's cheeks burned. She walked faster past the well, past the blacksmith's forge, past the little chapel with its bell that never rang unless someone had died. She did not look back. She told herself the women were only gossiping, that they did not know her, that it did not matter. But the words had already lodged themselves under her skin like thistles, small and sharp, and she could feel them pricking with every step. She did not go to the old house that morning. Instead, she went to the edge of the village where the stream ran shallow and clear, and she sat down on a flat stone with her knees drawn up to her chin. She watched the water move over the pebbles, and she tried to think of nothing at all, but the thistles kept pricking. A girl like that ought not to be filling the king's ears. What did they think she was doing? What did they think she wanted? She had not asked the king for anything, not once. She had only wanted to see him smile, the way he had almost smiled at the dandelion seeds, things they drifted away. Was that so wrong? She sat there a long time, until the sun climbed higher and her shadow grew short beneath her. Then she heard footsteps on the path behind her, and she turned, half expecting to see Marin's familiar, worried face. It was not Marin. It was a man she had seen only twice before, both times at a distance. Sir Aldrich, the king's senior companion, tall and broad-shouldered, with a gray-streaked beard and eyes the color of winter slate. He wore the dark leather of the king's household guard, and there was a sword at his belt that had seen real use, Nora could tell. He stopped a few paces from her, his hands resting on his hips, and looked down at her with an expression she could not quite read. "You are the girl," he said. It was not a question. Nora's throat tightened. She nodded. Because her voice had gone shy. "The girl who brings the king tea," Sir Aldrich went on, his tone flat, unhurried. "The girl who fixed his horse's shoe. The girl who gives him dandelions." So he knew about the dandelion. Nora's stomach dropped. She had not thought anyone had seen them, but of course the old house had windows, and the yard was open, and a king's household was never truly alone. "I did not mean any harm," she said, and her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. "I only thought—" "You thought," Sir Aldrich repeated, and there was no mockery in it. But no kindness either. "That is precisely the trouble, girl, you think. You think a king is a man like any other, who may be approached and spoken to and given flowers. But a king is not like any other. A king carries the weight of a realm on his shoulders, and every moment he spends on diversions is a moment stolen from the people he governs." Nora's fingers curled into her palms. "I did not steal anything from anyone." "You did not mean to," Sir Aldrich said, and his voice softened just slightly, which somehow made it worse. "I believe you mean well. But meaning well is not enough. The king is a grieving man. He has lost more than you can imagine, and he does not need a village girl stirring up feelings he has worked hard to bury. Do you understand what I am telling you?" Nora understood. She understood all too well. She understood that she was being told, gently and firmly, that she was not wanted, that her presence was a disturbance, a complication, a thing to be managed and removed. She looked down at her hands, at the small white scar on her left palm, and she said very quietly, "I will not go to the old house anymore." Sir Aldrich was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "That would be wise." And he turned and walked back up the path, his boots crunching on the dry earth, leaving Nora alone by the stream, with the thistles prickling under her skin, and a new, cold weight settling in her chest. She stayed by the stream all morning. She watched the water and she did not cry, because crying was a luxury she had never been able to afford. But when the sun reached its highest point and her stomach began to ache with hunger, she finally stood, brushed the dust from her skirt, and walked back toward Marin's cottage with her head held carefully level. Marin was kneading bread at the table when Nora came in. She took one look at Nora's face and set the dough aside, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron. "What happened?" Marin asked, and her voice was sharp with the particular worry she always carried for Nora, the worry that had been there since the day she had found a thin, frightened child standing at her door with nothing but a pair of 2 big shoes and a name. Nora shook her head. "Nothing. I think I will stay home for a few days. There is mending to do and the herbs need drying." Marin studied her for a long moment. She did not press, which was unlike her, but she also did not look away. "Nora," she said quietly, "you know you can tell me, whatever it is." Nora's throat tightened again. She wanted to tell her. She wanted to pour out the whole painful thing. Sir Eldric's words, the women at the well, the way her chest felt like a birdcage with the door closed. But she also knew that if she started speaking, she might not be able to stop, and Marin would worry, and Marin would go to the king, and that would only make everything worse. So she said, "I know. There is nothing to tell. I am just tired." Marin's eyes searched hers, but she did not push. She only nodded, and turned back to the bread and said, "There is honey cake in the larder. You can have a piece if you like." Nora did not want honey cake. She wanted to go back in time, to yesterday morning, to the moment before she had picked that dandelion. She wanted to be invisible again, the way she had been for most of her life, because invisible was safe. Invisible could not be sent away. But she took a piece of honey cake anyway, because it was Marin's way of loving her. And she ate it, slowly at the table. And she said nothing at all about the tall, grail-bearded man, or the words that had stung like thistles. That evening, as the light began to fade, she found herself walking past the old house. Not to go in, just to pass by, to see if perhaps the window was lit, to see if perhaps he was standing there, the way he had stood with the dandelion stem in his hand, looking at something she could not see. The window was dark, the yard was empty. The old house stood silent against the deepening blue of the sky, and Nora realized, with a dull and familiar ache, that she had been half hoping he would be waiting for her, the way she had waited for him by the stream. He was not. Of course he was not. He was a king, and she was a village girl who had been told, kindly and firmly, to stay in her place. Nora turned away and she walked back to Marin's cottage, and she did not look back at the old house again. But that night, before she blew out the candle, she took the white cloth from the little table by her bed, folded it carefully, and tucked it back under her pillow, where she would not have to see it every time she opened her eyes. It was easier that way, safer, the way everything had to be now. The morning came slowly to Ashwell, the way it always did when the sky could not decide whether to rain. Alexander stood at the window of the old house with a cup of cold tea in his hand, and he realized, with a small and unfamiliar ache, that the tea had been sitting there for 2 hours. He had not touched it. He had been watching the path. The path stayed empty. He told himself it meant nothing. The girl had her chores. The village had its rhythms. A child did not owe him her presence, and he had no right to expect it. He had spent 6 days reminding himself of exactly this, and yet here he was, on the 7th, watching a dirt path like a man waiting for a letter he knew would never come. By midday, he had walked the length of the village twice. He told himself it was for the exercise, that his leg had grown stiff from too much sitting. He passed the well, the mill, the blacksmith's forge. He saw the blacksmith's boy hauling water, and the baker's wife shaking out her apron. He did not see a small figure in a faded blue dress. He stopped at the healer's cottage. The door was open, and a fat thing, the smell of dried herbs, drifted out into the street. He stood in the doorway longer than he should have, and when Marin appeared with her hands full of chamomile, she startled so badly she nearly dropped the basket. "Your Majesty," she breathed, and bogged a curtsy. "Forgive me. I wasn't expecting—" "Is the girl ill?" The question came out, blunter than he intended. Marin blinked at him. "Nora?" "No, sire, she's been quiet, that's all. Keeps to her corner these days. I thought she might be coming down with something, but she has no fever. And she eats, so I—" "Quiet how?" Marin set the basket down, and wiped her hands on her apron, looking uncertain. "She's always been a quiet one, you know that. But these last 2 days she's been quieter still. Doesn't hum when she works. Doesn't name the birds at the window." She paused.
I asked her if something happened, and she said no. She just felt tired. But I've known that girl since she was small enough to hold in one arm, and I can tell you, sire, she does not get tired." Alexander said nothing. He stood in the doorway for a moment longer, and then he nodded, once, and turned away. He walked to the river. He did not know why he chose the river. Perhaps because it was where she had sat during the harvest festival, alone, before he had sent the honey cake. Perhaps because it was the one place in this village that felt like hers. He followed the path through the tall grass until the water came into view, silver and slow under the afternoon sky. She was there. She sat on the flat stone by the bank, the same one she had sat on during the festival, her knees drawn up to her chin and her arms wrapped around them. She was not doing anything. She was not gathering flowers or naming birds or drawing on bits of wood. She was just thinking, staring at the water, and the sight of her there, so still, so small, made something tighten in his chest. He made no effort to hide his approach. His boots were loud on the gravel, and he saw her shoulders stiffen the moment she heard him. She did not turn around. "Nora," she flinched. It was a small thing, barely a movement, but he saw it. She kept her face toward the river. "I have been looking for you," he said. He stopped a few paces behind her, close enough to speak without raising his voice, far enough that she would not feel cornered. "Marin said you have been quiet." She said nothing. The river kept its steady, unhurried sound. Did something happen? Still nothing. He watched the back of her head, the way her hair fell forward and hid her face. He had seen her brave and direct, had heard her speak to him without the trembling deference he was used to. This silence was different. This was a wall. He did something he had not done in many years. He sat down on the grass, a few feet away from her, and he waited. The minutes stretched. The sun moved a little lower in the sky. He heard a lark somewhere behind them, and the soft rustle of the grass in the wind. He did not speak. He did not fill the silence with the easy authority of a king. He waited, the way he had learned to wait for a wounded horse, with patience and without pressure, until the creature decided on its own that he was safe. After a long time, she spoke. Her voice was small and rough. "You don't have to sit there." "I know," he said. "I'm not—" She stopped. Her hands tightened around her knees. "I'm not going to the old house anymore." He felt the words land somewhere in his chest, quiet and final. He had expected this, perhaps on some level. He had felt it coming all morning in the empty the cold tea and the watching. Still, hearing it said aloud was different. "Why?" She did not answer. Her shoulders curved forward, making herself smaller. "Did someone tell you to stay away?" The silence that followed was answer enough. He watched her face, half hidden behind her hair, and he saw the way her jaw tightened. "Was it one of my men?" She shook her head. "Too quickly, Nora." He kept his voice gentle, the way he had learned from the horses. "Look at me." She did not look at him. "I am not going to command you to speak," he said. "I am not going to make this an order, but I would like to understand. If you will let me." She was quiet for so long he thought she would not answer. Then she took a breath, and it shuddered a little on the way in. "People are talking," she said. "In the village. About me. About you. About why a king would let an orphan girl fill his ears." She swallowed. "And they're right to talk. I'm nobody. I'm the girl who picks flowers and talks to birds. I don't belong in the old house with a king." He did not speak for a moment. The river moved past them, unhurried and indifferent. "Who told you this?" "It doesn't matter who told me. It's true." "It is not true." She finally turned her head, just enough that he could see the edge of her face, the corner of her eye. "How do you know? You barely know me. You've only been here a week. Maybe they're right. Maybe I was just a novelty. Something new for a king to look at. And then you'll leave, and everyone will say—" Her voice cracked. "Everyone will say I was a fool for thinking I mattered." The words hung in the air between the Ilion's stem, dry and fragile and still intact. Her breath caught. "I have carried this since the day you gave it to me," he said. "I have touched it every morning. I have not told anyone why. I have not thrown it away. I do not know what it means, Nora, but I know it is not nothing." She stared at the stem in his hand. Her eyes were bright, and she blinked hard. "I am not good with words," he said.
I have never been. I have spent my life being told that a king does not explain himself, does not show weakness, does not let anyone see what he carries. So I will not try to tell you what I feel." He held the stem out toward her, gently. "But I kept this, and I will keep it until it crumbles to dust in my fingers. That is all I know how to say." She looked at the stem. Then she looked at him. And for the first time since he had arrived at the riverbank, her shoulders came down just a little. "You kept it," she whispered. "I kept it," he said. She did not take the stem from his hand, but she looked at him, really looked at him, and the wall in her eyes cracked by the smallest, truest degree. "The river is cold today," she said, very quietly. "Yes," he said. "It is." She turned back toward the water, but she did not curl in on herself the way she had before. She sat a little straighter, and after a moment she said, "You can sit here if you want." He did not smile. He was not a man who smiled easily, but something in his chest loosened, and he stayed where he was, sitting on the grass at the edge of the river, watching the water with her as the afternoon softened into evening. The messenger arrived at noon, when the sun stood directly over Ashwell and the wheat fields shimmered like a sea of pale gold. Alexander heard the drum of hooves before he saw the rider, and something in his chest tightened, because he knew that sound. He had heard it too many times in his life to mistake it for anything but what it was. The horse came to a stop in front of the old manor where he had been staying, its flanks heaving, foam white at the corners of its mouth. The rider slid off before the animal had fully stopped, his face streaked with dust and sweat, and he dropped to one knee in the yard. "My lord," the man gasped, holding out a sealed scroll. "From the capital. Urgent." Alexander took the scroll. The wax seal was cracked, and the paper was creased and worn from the journey. He did not open it right away. He stood there in the noon heat, the weight of the thing in his hand telling him more than the words inside ever could. "Leave us," he said to the rider. "See to your horse." The man nodded and led the animal toward the trough, and Alexander was alone in the yard with the unopened scroll and the sound of a village that did not yet know its king was about to leave it. He broke the seal. The words were brief, written in the chancellor's tight, careful hand. There was trouble in the north. The border lords had grown restless, and there were whispers of an alliance forming against the crown. The council had voted to send word to the king, pleading for his immediate return. The kingdom needed him. The kingdom always needed him. Alexander read the scroll twice, then folded it and tucked it into his belt. He stood for a long moment, looking out over the village of Ashwell, at the smoke rising from the chimneys, at the children chasing each other through the dusty lanes, at the small, crooked house at the edge of the meadow, where a girl with gray-blue eyes was probably mending a fence, or gathering wildflowers, or doing something quietly useful that she thought. "In my second, think. Seen." Think so that friend he had the tremors. He had known this moment would come. He had known it from the first night, when he had lain awake in the unfamiliar bed and listened to the wind move through the wheat. He was a king. He had duties that stretched far beyond this small village, far beyond one orphan girl with a kind heart and a direct way of speaking. He had always known he would leave. What he had not known was that it would feel like this. Sir Aldrich appeared at the edge of the yard, his boots crunching on the gravel. He had seen the messenger arrive, and his face already wore the expression of a man who had made up his mind about something. "My lord," he said, his voice carrying the particular weight of a man delivering an unwelcome truth. "The road north will be dangerous if we wait. The pass closes at the end of the month, and the border lords will not wait for winter to make their move." Alexander did not turn around. "I am aware of the pass." "Then you know we must leave by morning. Tomorrow, at the latest, the horses are rested and the men are ready. We can reach the capital in 6 days if we ride hard." 6 days. Alexander had been in Ashwell for 7. In 6 days he could be back in the stone halls of Thornwood, surrounded by advisors and maps and the cold, familiar weight of a crown that never let him forget what he was. "I will give my orders this evening," he said. Sir Aldrich hesitated. There was something he wanted to say. Alexander could feel it hanging in the air like the heat before a storm, but the man was wise enough to hold his tongue, and after a moment he bowed and withdrew. The afternoon passed slowly. Alexander went through the motions of preparing for departure, giving orders to his men, checking the horses, reviewing the supplies. It was all routine. The meek movements he had performed 100 times before, but his mind was elsewhere, caught on the image of a girl standing in the middle of a road, refusing to move out of the way of a frightened horse. He tried to tell himself that it was nothing, that she was simply a kind child he had met by chance, that the warmth he felt when she looked at him with those serious gray-blue eyes was nothing more than the affection any man might feel for a child who had shown him unexpected kindness. But he had never been good at lying to himself, and he knew that this was different. He had not made a wish in 20 years. He had not let himself want anything. Not really. Not since the day he had watched his wife lowered into the cold ground and his son's small grave dug beside her. Wanting things was a dangerous business. Wanting things meant you could lose them. And yet, when he had taken that dandelion from Nora's hand, he had felt something stir in his chest that he had thought was long dead. A small, foolish, hopeful thing, like a seed waiting for rain. He had kept the stem in his pocket ever since, and he had not told anyone. It was dry now, the white fluff mostly gone from the head. The green stem faded to a pale, brittle brown. But it was still whole, and he had found himself touching it more and more as the hours passed, as if the feel of it beneath his fingers could somehow anchor him to this place, to this moment, to the possibility of something he had not allowed himself to imagine. By evening, the decision could no longer be postponed. The men were packed, the horses saddled, the last sequoias loaded onto the wagons. Alexander stood in the yard of the old manor, watching the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and rose. Sir Aldrich approached one last time, his voice low and respectful. "My lord, we should be on the road by first light. The men are ready. We only await your word." Alexander nodded. "We will leave at dawn." He walked through the village as the lamps were being lit, one hand resting on the pommel of his sword, his boots making soft sounds on the packed earth of the lane. The villagers nodded to him as he passed, a mixture of fear and respect in their eyes. They did not know why he was walking, and he did not tell them. He came to the Slaw Cricker house at the edge of the meadow, and he stopped. A light burned in the window. He could see her silhouette moving inside, small and quick, carrying something from one side of the room to the other. He imagined her setting the table for supper, talking to her birds through the window, drawing pictures on scraps of wood with a piece of charcoal. He had stood in the middle of battlefields without flinching. He had faced down lords who had tried to take his throne, and he had not once doubted himself. But standing here, in the dusk, in front of a door that belonged to no one important in the eyes of the kingdom, he could not make himself knock. He did not want to say goodbye. He did not know how to say goodbye. He had never been good at goodbyes, and he had said far too many of them in his life. The door opened. Nora stood there, her hair loose around her shoulders, a smudge of something dark on her cheek. She looked up at him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The evening air was warm and soft, and the lamps inside cast a golden glow around her, like a painting in an old book. "You're leaving," she said. It was not a question. She knew. Of course she knew. He had not told her, but she had known the moment she saw the messenger's horse, the way childs think always knew things that adults tried to hide. "Yes," he said, "at dawn." She nodded slowly, and he watched her face carefully, looking for the crack that he had seen at the riverbank. The small, true opening that had made him believe for a moment that he might be more than just a king to her. But her face was smooth, almost too smooth, and she held herself very still. "I should have told you sooner," he said. "It doesn't matter." She looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "You're a king. Kings leave. That's what they do." Something in his chest twisted at her words. At the flat, matter-of-fact way she said them, as if she had already resigned herself to his departure. As if she had known all along that he would go, and had simply been waiting for it to happen. "Nora," he said, and the name felt strange on his tongue, because he had never said it aloud to her before, had always called her child or girl or nothing at all. "I did not want to leave without telling you." She looked at him, and for a moment her composure wavered. He saw it. The tiny crack at the edge of her mouth, the way her fingers curled into fists at her sides. And then she did something that surprised him. She stepped forward and pressed something into his hand. He looked down. It was a dandelion stem, a fresh one, the head still covered in soft white fluff.
She must have picked it from the meadow that very evening, before the sun had gone down. "You can make a wish," she said quietly, "before you go. You're supposed to blow it into the wind, and wherever the seeds land, that's where the wish goes." He stared at the dandelion in his hand, and he felt something crack open inside him, something he had kept locked and guarded for 20 years. He had not made a wish since he was a boy. He not believed in wishes, had not believed in anything that could not be bought with steel or held in a fist. But here, in the fading light, with this small, serious girl looking up at him with hope and loss, and something fierce in her gray-blue eyes, he found himself wanting to believe. Just this once. Just for her. "Will you come back?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her, at the crooked house behind her, at the meadow where she had picked this dandelion, at the whole small world she had built here on the edge of a village that did not know her worth. "I will try," he said, and it was the truest thing he had said in a very long time. He lifted the dandelion to his lips, closed his eyes, and blew. The seeds scattered into the evening air, caught by the wind, spinning and dancing away into the growing dark. He watched them go, and he made his wish. When he opened his eyes, Nora was smiling. It was a small smile, tentative and fragile, but it was real, and it was for him. "I'll be here," she said. "When you come back, I'll be here." He reached out, and for the first time he let his hand rest on her head, his fingers brushing through her hair. It was a simple gesture, a father's gesture, a thing he had never had the chance to be. And yet, standing there in the dusk with this orphan girl, he felt the weight of the crown settle a little lighter on his brow. "Good night, Nora," he said. "Good night, Your Majesty," she whispered. He turned and walked back toward the manor, the dry stem of the first dandelion still in his pocket, the memory of the second one's seeds already scattered to the wind. Behind him, the light in the crooked window burned on into the night, a small, stubborn flame against the dark. The night was warm, but the air carried the thin silver edge of something about to end. Nora lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to the crickets argue with the frogs down by the river. She had said goodbye once already, in the doorway with the dandelion and the careful words, but sleep would not come, because goodbye had not truly been said. She slipped out of bed, pulled her faded blue dress over her shift, and padded barefoot across the cool floorboards. Marin was snoring in the next room, a soft, whistling sound that Nora had known her whole life. She eased the door open and stepped into the night. The village slept. The moon hung low and fat over the rooftops, and the wheat field beyond the last house glowed silver as water. Nora did not know where she was going until her feet stopped in front of the old cottage where the king had been staying for 8 days. A light still burned inside, faint and amber leaking through the shutters. She almost turned away. She had already said what needed to be said. But then she saw him. Alexander sat on the low stone step in front of the cottage, his elbows on his knees, his head bowed. He wore no cloak, no armor, only a plain linen shirt, open at the collar, and dark breeches. In the moonlight, he looked smaller, younger, and terribly tired. In his hands, he held something small and pale, turning it over and over. Nora took a step forward, then another. The gravel crunched under her foot, and he looked up. For a moment, neither of them spoke. His eyes, that strange gray-green, caught the moonlight and held it. He did not look surprised to see her. Perhaps he had known she would come. "I could not sleep," she said quietly, because it was the truth. He nodded slowly and looked down at his hands. She came closer and saw what he was holding. It was the stem of the first dandelion she had given him 6 days ago. It had dried and curled, the tiny white seeds long gone, but he had kept the stem itself, smooth and pale as bone. She sat down on the step beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, but not quite. The stone was cold through the thin cotton of her dress. Neither of them spoke for a long while. The crickets kept up their endless argument, and somewhere beyond the wheat field an owl called once, twice. "I keep thinking," Alexander said at last, his voice low and rough, "that I should have left today. I should have been on the road before the sun set." He turned the dried stem between his fingers. "I told myself I was staying because the horse needed another day of rest, but the horse has been sound since yesterday noon."
Nora did not answer. She had learned that sometimes a person needs to fill the silence themselves, and that the best thing you can do is simply be there to hear it. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "Do you know why I stopped coming to this village?" She shook her head, though she had wondered. "Because it is close to the place where I lost them." His voice cracked, just slightly on the word them. "My wife. My son." There is a small wood, about a day's ride north of here, where the road curves around a lake. We were returning from a visit to her family. It was late autumn. The rain had been falling for 3 days, and the river had risen over the bridge. Nora held her breath. She could feel the shape of what was coming, the weight of it settling onto the step between them like a stone. There was a tree that had fallen across the road. My horse shied and the carriage wheel broke. I was riding ahead with 2 of my men. I heard the crack and the screaming, and by the time I turned, Egan had rode back. The water had taken the carriage. He stopped. His hands were still, wrapped around the dried stem. They found her body 3 days later. Downstream, they found my son's cradle wedged against a rock. They never found him. He was 4 years old. His name was Thomas. The name hung in the warm night air, small and terribly light, like a seed that had never been given the chance to grow. Nora felt the tears on her own cheeks before she knew she was crying. She did not wipe them away. She sat very still, because she understood that this was not her grief to carry, but she could stand beside it, and that was enough. "I was 24 years old," Alexander said. "I had been king for 6 years. I had buried my father, and I had thought that was the worst thing the world could do to me. I was wrong." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, not quite a breath. "After that, I learned the only way to survive was not to want anything, not to need anyone. Because wanting meant moosing, needing meant the same." He turned his head and looked at her, and in the moonlight his eyes were wet. "I have not made a wish in 20 years, Nora. Do you know what that is like? To go through your days with your heart closed up tight, like a fist that has forgotten how to open." She opened her mouth, closed it, and then in the small, steady voice she had used to name the birds and calm the frightened horses, she said, "You made a wish tonight. You held the dandelion and you closed your eyes and you wished." He looked down at her and something in his face shifted, like ice cracking under the first warmth of spring. "I did," he said, barely above a whisper, "and you told me you would try to come back." She reached for his hand, the one holding the dried stem, and wrapped Tank's small fingers around it. "That is not the hand of a man who has forgotten how to want. That is the hand of a man who is learning again." He stared at her, and then, slowly, he opened his hand and let the dried stem lie across his palm. The moonlight touched it, pale and fragile, all that was left of a wish made 6 days ago. "It will come back," Nora said. "The dandelions grow everywhere. The fields at the edge of the wood are full of them in spring. You can wish again, as many times as you need." He looked at the stem, then at her, and for a long moment the only sound was the crickets, and the distant, patient breathing of the river. "You asked me," he said slowly, "what I wished for. Tonight, when you gave me the second dandelion." She nodded, not daring to breathe. "I wished," he said, "that I could be the kind of man who deserves to be remembered by a girl like you. That I could learn to open my hand again and not be afraid of what the wind might take." Nora felt her throat tighten. She squeezed his hand hard and said, "You already are that man. You just do not see it yet." He bowed his head and a single tear fell onto the back of her hand, warm and brief as summer rain. He did not pull away. He let her hold his hand and she let him cry without words, without hurry, without anything but the quiet, fierce presence of a girl who had learned in her short life that the greatest gift you can give a person is simply to stay. The moon climbed higher. The village slept on around them, unaware that a king had wept on a stone step and that a child had held his hand through it, and that somewhere in the dark, a wish was already beginning to grow roots. After a long time, Alexander lifted his head. He drew a breath, slow and steady, and let it out. He looked at the wall, grabbed its stem in his palm, then closed his fingers around it gently, as if it were something precious, and tucked it back into the pocket over his heart. "You should go back inside," he said, his voice steadier now, though still rough at the edges. "You will need your sleep. The morning comes early." She rose, and so did he. They stood facing each other in the moonlight, and he looked down at her with an expression she could not quite name. It was not pity, it was not pride. It was something older and softer, something that looked like the beginning of hope. "Thank you," he said. 2 words, small and plain, but he said them like a man setting down a burden he had carried for 20 years. She nodded, and then, because she was still a girl who said what she thought, she said, "When you come back, there will be more dandelions in the field by the river. I will pick you a fresh one." He smiled. It was a small smile, barely a curve at the corner of his mouth, but it lit his whole face with something that had not been there 8 days ago. "I will look for it," he said. She turned and walked back through the sleeping village, her bare feet silent on the cool earth, and she did not look back, but she felt his gaze on her back the whole way, warm and steady, like a lantern left burning in a window. When she reached the door of Marin's cottage, she paused and looked over her shoulder. He was still standing in front of the old cottage, a tall, dark shape in the moonlight, and he raised one hand in a slow wave. She raised hers in answer, and then slipped inside, closing the door softly behind her. She lay down on her bed, and this time, sleep came quickly. In her dream, a field of dandelions stretched to the horizon, and the wind blew through them, and every seed carried a wish. And just think, the wishes were flying north, toward the road that would bring him home. The road to Ashwell had not changed in a year. The same ruts, the same wild roses tangled in the hedgerows, the same smell of warm earth and ripening barley. Alexander reined his horse to a stop at the top of the last low hill, and for a long moment he simply looked down at the village spread in the valley below. Smoke rose from the chimneys in thin, unhurried ribbons. A dog barked somewhere near the mill. The roofs were patched with new thatch in places, and the little wooden bridge over the stream had been mended with fresh timber. The Thornwood pack had not forgotten this place. He had seen to that. His hand moved to his chest, to the small flat pouch sewn inside his tunic. The dandelion stem was still there, dry and light as a whisper, wrapped in a scrap of linen. He had touched it every day for a year, on the long ride north to quell the border lords, in the cold council chambers where men argued about grain taxes and fortress walls, in the sleepless hours when the old grief came knocking, heavy as a winter cloak. He had kept his promise. He had made a wish, and he had come back. The village below him stirred with the ordinary business of a summer morning. Women hung washing on lines behind their cottages. A cart creaked toward the mill, piled high with sacks. Children ran barefoot along the lane, chasing a hoop with sticks and shouting at the tops of their voices. Alexander watched them for a long moment, and something in his chest loosened. Just a little. He touched his heels to the horse's flanks and started down the hill. The villagers saw him coming from a distance. Word spread quickly, the way it does in small places. By the time he reached the edge of the lane, a small crowd had added the green. Not many, for the village was not large, but enough. They bowed and curtsied, some uncertain, some beaming. A woman near the front held up a basket of early apples and called out a greeting in a voice that shook only a little. Alexander dismounted and handed the reins to one of his men. He did not lift his hand to silence them, nor did he speak a grand word. He simply stood there, tall and quiet, and let his eyes move slowly over the faces. He was looking for her. Marin came out of the herb house before he had to ask. Her gray hair was pinned up loosely, and she was wiping her hands on her apron, and there was something in her face, a knowing, patient smile that made his throat tighten. "Your Majesty," she said, and curtsied. Then, before he could speak, she added, "She is down by the river, where she always goes when she is thinking." He nodded. He did not trust his voice just then. The path to the river was narrow and overgrown the way he remembered it. The same ferns brushed his boots, the same bees drifted lazily among the wild thyme. He walked slowly, not because he was tired, but because he wanted to stretch this moment, this last few steps of not yet knowing, into something longer. And then he saw her. She was sitting on the flat stone by the water's edge, the same stone where he'd found her all those months ago. Her back was to him. Her brown hair was longer now, past her shoulders, and it moved a little in the breeze. She wore a blue dress, not the same faded one, a newer one, still simple, but with a neat white collar that had been carefully sewn. She was not doing anything, just sitting, with her knees drawn up and her arms wrapped around them, watching the water.
He stopped at the edge of the clearing. For a moment, he did not speak. He just looked at her, at the way the sunlight caught the edges of her hair, at the smallness of her shoulders, at the familiar way she tilted her head when she was lost in thought. Then she turned. She must have heard something. The creak of his boot, the shift of his cloak, some small sound he had not meant to make. She turned, and her eyes found him, and for one long heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Nora smiled. It was not a wise smile, not a noisy one. It was the quiet, sure smile of a girl who had been waiting, who had trusted that the waiting would end, and who had been proved right. She stood up slowly, brushing the grass from her skirt, and she walked toward him without hurry. She stopped a few paces away and looked up at him. Her eyes, gray-blue as the river in shadow, moved over his face as if checking for changes, for the marks of the year that had passed. He stood still under her gaze, letting her look. "You came back," she said. It was not a question. "I said I would." She nodded, as if that settled something. Then she reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out something small and pale. A dandelion. Fresh, this one. The stem still green and cool with the morning dew, the head a perfect round of white fluff, not a seed missing. She held it out to him. "I picked it this morning," she said, "before the sun was fully up while the dew was still on it. I thought if you came today, it should be a fresh one." Alexander looked at the dandelion in her small hand. Then he looked at her face, at the earnest, unguarded hope in it, and something broke open in his chest. Not painfully, not like a wound, but like a door that had been stuck for a very long time, swinging wide at last. He did not take the flower immediately. Instead, he reached into his tunic and drew out the small linen-wrapped bundle. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing the dry, pale stem of the first dandelion, the one she had given him on the evening before he left, the one that had lived in his breast pocket for a year. Nora's eyes went wide, her lips parted, and for a moment she looked very young, very moved. "You kept it," she whispered. "I kept it," he said. His voice was rough, but steady. "I touched it every day. It reminded me—" He stopped, swallowed, and started again. "It reminded me that I had made a wish, and that I meant to keep it." She looked at the dry stem, then at the fresh dandelion in her own hand, and a small, wondering laugh escaped her. "They look like two different seasons," she said. "One is winter, one is summer." He nodded slowly. "That is how it should be." He tucked the dry stem back into its linen and returned it to his chest. Then, very carefully, he reached out and took the fresh dandelion from her hand. His fingers brushed hers, just for a moment, and he felt her small, calloused hand tremble slightly. Not from fear, he thought, but from something else, something he recognized. He held the dandelion up. The seeds quivered in the breeze, ready to fly. "May I make another wish?" he asked. Nora's smile widened. It was the first time he had seen it truly bright, the sun coming out from behind a cloud. "That is what dandelions are for," she said. He closed his eyes. He did not need to think about what he wished for. It had been waiting in him for a year, patient as a seed in frozen ground. He opened his eyes, raised the dandelion to his lips, and blew. The seeds lifted into the air in a soft white cloud, catching the light, scattering on the wind over the river, toward the fields, toward the whole green world. He watched them go with a feeling he had not named in 20 years. Lightness. Nora was watching him. When he looked down at her, she was smiling still, but her eyes were bright with something that was not quite tears. "Did you make a good wish?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "The best one I have ever made." He crouched down then, the way he had on the night before he left, so that his eyes were level with hers. The grass was damp with morning, and he did not care. He looked for a long moment at this girl who had handed him a weed and told him to wish, and he let himself feel the full weight of what she had given him. He had come back. He had kept his promise. He had learned at last to open his hand and let the wind take what it would, and to trust that what mattered would stay. "I am not leaving again," he said quietly. "Not for a long time. The border is settled, the lords have been reminded of their oaths, and I have spent a year learning something I should have learned long ago." "What is that?" she asked. He smiled. It was a small smile, a little crooked, the smile of a man out of practice.
but it was real. That a wish is not a thing to be guarded, he said. It is a thing to be shared, and that the people who matter are not the ones who bow lowest, but the ones who hand you a dandelion and trust you to blow. Nora's chin trembled. She did not cry, not quite, but her voice was very small when she said, I missed you. I told myself I would not, because I did not want to be disappointed. But I did. I missed you every day. I missed you too, he said. Every day. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and the river ran on beside them, patient and unhurried, carrying the morning light downstream. Then Nora reached out and took his hand. It was a small hand, still, but not as small as before. She had grown, she would keep growing, and Alexander thought with a quiet, steady certainty that he would be there to see it. Come, she said. Marin has honey cakes. She saved some for you. She said you would come back for them. He laughed, a real laugh, rusty and surprised, as if he had forgotten he knew how. Nora's eyes lit up at the sound. Your Majesty, she said, tucking his hand, you laugh now. I suppose I do, he said. It seems I have been learning. They walked back to the village together, the tall king and the orphan girl, her hand still in his. The dandelion seeds had scattered far by now, some catching in the grass, some drifting over the rooftops, some riding the wind toward the edge of the world. He did not try to catch them. He let them go. And in the quiet of his chest, beside the dry stem of the first dandelion, a new wish took root and began to grow. It was not a wish for power or for safety or for anything he could hold in his hands. It was simpler than that. It was a wish that had waited a year to be spoken. He did not say it aloud. Some wishes, he had learned, are meant to be kept like seeds, planted quietly, watered with patience, and trusted to bloom in their own time. But as he walked with Nora through the summer grass, with the smell of honey cakes drifting from the herb house and the sound of her voice chattering about the new kittens behind the mill, Alexander let himself believe that this wish, too, would come true. After all, he had made it on a dandelion, and that, she had told him once, was how wishes were meant to be made. He smiled and walked on into the morning. It seems, dear listeners, even the heaviest crowns can be lifted by a single dandelion seed. If Alexander and Nora's quiet courage warmed you, subscribe and stay a while. Leave your city in the comments tonight and tell me, did the king's hidden wish move you? Until our next tale, keep the embers glowing.